Hello, I am Vicky Manitou Okas. Welcome, and I am glad that you could join me today for this huge and very important topic. So, today I want to talk about gardening for ability. Yeah, the most important part is getting the structural elements in place. But the plants that you choose, if you're gardening for ability, the plants that you choose are critically important for the amount of time and energy that you're putting into your system ongoing. That's where some of the core permaculture principles come in. Because if you're gardening for ability, efficiency, and ease, things that make things easier on you going forward, then you need to work with the environment that you have at hand. And you need to create microclimates that um, enhance your life and your ability to function. Okay. This is where working with plants that naturally grow in the climate and soil that you're creating in your space. So you if you stick with climate appropriate plants, that cuts your workload down, sometimes by 90%. Okay. So if you're gardening for ability, stick with mostly with what grows easy where you're at. Okay. Create your microclimates. Use your plantings and your structures to create the microclimates that make the most of your strengths. Okay. And minimize your challenges. Shade, sun. Where you are at, are you going to function best in the shade or are you going to function best in the sun? That's the that's the microclimate that you want to create. And you create that with trellising, you create that with um, which plants you put in and their height. Okay. You create that with barriers if you need to, fencing, or if you need to have somebody come in and put in ground barriers to keep your invasive growth out. Those are the things that you do to create that microclimate in your space that's going to make things easier. One of the things that's a challenge here is blackberries. Well, if you've got lots of energy and are a good amount of strength, you can go out there and dig them out every year. If you're gardening for ability, you want to keep them out to start with, or keep them where they should be, out of other spaces from the start. And that's typically creating a barrier of some sort. Okay. When you're choosing your plants, choose plants that play well together. So if you've got low rainfall, or you're creating a bed that is sandy and well draining, then keep plants in that one that play well with that kind of a climate. Okay. If you've got a tiered system, parts of that tier are going to be dry and parts of that tier are going to be wet. Okay. So you want to plant your plants that like dry, well-drained soil on the top, and plants that want a little bit moister, shadier conditions a little bit lower in that tier. Okay. So those are the thing, yeah, that's creating systems where the plants play well together. And some plants chase the pests away from the other plants. So that if you're mixing them up, then the things that like tomatoes don't like, rosemary. Okay. So if you're plant your plants together that protect each other and play well together instead of competing for the same resources in the same space. And that makes your life easier. Go from the other thing that to do to make life easier is to work towards a perennial system. So if you're working with perennials, then you're going to create systems that take less maintenance over time. Okay. Also think about your levels of production that stay in your comfort limit, in your comfort and energy zone, so that you're creating layers so that you've got a top tier that's up here in your comfort zone, and you're creating an area that's right here, and you've got a ground cover so that you don't a ground cover type crop or plant that so that you don't have that weeding issues. So that when you're dealing with gardening for ability, you want to decrease the amount of daily maintenance in your garden. Okay. So you've got uh, systems that work together. Okay. One of the biggest um, uses of time in the garden is, other than weeding, is fertility. And it's critically important that you capture and utilize the resources that are at hand, but in a way that is basically self-sustaining, so that you're creating your resources on site in a way that is effort friendly. So, um, compost is important. Compost is very important, but a compost pile is labor intensive. There are other ways of achieving the same thing. Okay? And encourage your community. So you're creating a synergetic system that is evolving and getting easier every single year. Okay? You know, we've already covered a lot of ground, and you know, we haven't talked about very much specific, because it's when you're talking specific, you're talking about a given garden. But you should have a good foundation for creating your garden. So what is that really going to look like in your garden? Well, the results are going to be up to you. The purpose of gardening for ability is to create a system of synergy where the environment, the plants, the resources, and your body all come together to inform the design and the evolution of your garden. So let's take a look at my grandmother's garden again. I know we've covered this a couple times, but if I had been a little bit wiser at the time, I would have started a system for her 10 years earlier than I did. It would have been tiny raised beds wrapped around her porch and her front yard, and designed for her walker. And it would have had composting systems in the garden. Instead of having her throw out kitchen scraps, I would have built in a composting system into the garden itself. And she potentially could have had a thriving garden that she was eating out of until the day she died. The other thing that would have been critical for her gardening for ability, if I had it put together the right way, would have been a self-watering system. Because ultimately, sh- she was hauling gallons of water out to those barrels daily to keep the plants watered. And even though she gardened for several more years after I set the barrels up for her, just the act of carrying a gallon of water to the garden became difficult for her. Whereas if the gardens themselves were self-watering, the only thing she would have had to do was go out and pluck a tomato. So it it helped, and it kept her gardening for longer, but it could have been better. For myself, I have injuries that I have to contend with, and I work about 60 hours a week. Okay. Out of the garden, I work 60 hours a week. I have to stay off of my knees. Okay. I have to keep my muscle work, my strength work between my knees and my chest. And I have to keep my overhead work to a minimal. Tiny gardens target my valuable time where it needs to be. Okay. Into energy to valuable time and energy into production of food, herbs, and medicine, and out of weeding and mowing and silly stuff. Okay. I am looking in the future to create systems that are automatically watering. Okay. As my systems get bigger, composting on in site. So automatic composting, automatic watering are going to be important for me going forward. Okay. And there's some other things that I can do to make my life easier going forward. Eh, Now, the reality is that, like I said, everybody's story is different. Okay. Your story is going to be different than mine. So your story is going to be determined, and what your garden looks like is going to be determined by what it is that you want and your body's ability, how much money and resources you can put into it, getting it set up, and maybe how much help you can get. Okay. Can you use this to build community? How can you work together? So, what you're going to do going forward is to create your long term solutions that work for you. Okay. Create systems that are that rely more on perennial plants or moving towards perennial plants that work naturally in your ecosystem in a way that is resilient and sustainable and enjoyable for you. So, yeah, a natural ecosystem is self replicating, evolving, and self fertilizing. So you want to try and replicate that going forward to make your life easier. Okay. You're looking at systems that are automatic. So if you're going to need watering systems, set it up in a way set it up in a way to the best of your ability that is automatic, so that all you're going to do in the future is turn a valve, okay, or turn a couple of valves, and the water is delivered instead of you delivering it. Composting, work towards systems that compost in the garden itself instead of in a compost pile. And there's a number of systems that do that very efficiently. Uh, and there's enough that it would take some research to fit the particular system to your life and system. When you create your own resiliency and sustainability, and the sustainability and resiliency of your community, you're creating peace of mind. Okay? You're creating the empowerment of yourself and your community. So, hey, let's work together. So, you know what? What would be the next step? I covered a lot of information and a lot of ideas, but what's the next step to put it into practice? Well, you can do it yourself. You take this information, the concepts, and you can go do some research and you can put it together. The information's out there and the ideas are there. You have to find them. Eh, I've got some tools that are some of them are free and some of them are a one-time purchase at uh, Manitou OCOS programs. There's workshops, there's coaching, okay, plant profiles. All that information is there, and it takes some time to find it. Another path forward would be to join us over at Delectable Tiny Gardens. Once you join, there is garden chats Friday and Sunday. Come and join us. Okay. Chat, have some fun, solve problems. Okay. There's the garden planner workshop there and several other workshops, container garden workshops, and people to help. A community that's coming together. Okay. Oh, and I'm there. See if you can stump me, stump Auntie Vicky. I do a lot of research. I love the challenge of somebody coming up with something that I don't know the answer to. If you're not sure what what your best path forward is, yeah, set up a free discovery call with me, and we'll talk about it. Or you can come and join us for a free trial at Delectable Tiny Gardens, and we can talk about it there. So there, what what does it look like for you going forward in your gardening for ability? So I would like to see and hear what you have to say. So, hey, like, subscribe, come and join us.